Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome to a new person I'm reacting to. This is Indigo Park Theory, the secret behind the shutdown, and this is by Id's Fantasy, or ID's Fantasy. I've heard people say it both ways. So if you haven't heard of her before, she's, most of the time she does like FNAF and like Five Nights at Freddy's theories, and she really came into prominence the last few years. Like, I've watched a fair number of her videos, and they're, they're really good. But, she's been, stretching her wings, but, spreading out, covering other things. And this, I think, is her first video on Indigo Park, which, given that the game only came out, so recently, I think so. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so this is her first Indigo Park theory. So I'm, excited, because I haven't actually watched any Indigo Park theories, which, if you didn't know, I did play it on my channel. Link to that will be, in the corner card thing. And I know that there's, some, the first chapter's already out, and while it's not the longest, it does give you, a bunch of stuff to, like, theorize about and, like, sink your teeth into, trying to think of what's going to happen. I myself have supported the production of Chapter 2 on Kickstarter, so that's going to be exciting to see. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of everything, like what made the mascots go mad? Like, was it the oh god, I'm forgetting your name now. The skunk that you see in the in the arcade game, did like she have some sort of similar ability in real life, and she turned all the like mascots hostile, and that's why their like eyes are black? Or was it something to do with Rambly? Because there was that one section on Rambly's Railroad where you have to get off to get the ride moving again, where you go in, where you see that one Molly Macaw animatronic, and it's sputtering out like, "Don't trust Rambly, he hurts Lloyd, he hurts Lloyd," that sort of stuff. Which, given that, Rambly is the AI that runs basically everything in the park, I don't see it being outside the realm of possibility that, his hatred of Lloyd would extend towards the mascot, and he could try to do whatever he does to, hurt the Lloyd mascot. Again, don't know. We're going to have to see what happens in future chapters. Again, and as I said before, I'm sad that Molly Macaw was like literally killed, because I was hoping that we'd find some way, either like in a later chapter, to like return her mind or return sanity or something. Which, also I listened to a person who posted up all of her, like all of the voice lines you hear her say in the background when she's following you throughout the game, or like when she's chasing you down the halls, and one of them was like, "Get back in your cage, bird," and another one was, like, "Don't touch that." So I'd assume that, during the park's like operation, there was some form of abuse, probably because this park staff treated them like literal animals, and they're possibly smarter than that. But yeah, I said I wasn't sure, like, if I'd continue, like, play the future chapters. But really, at this point, I'm already in, like, I've already supported the money. I'm going to get a copy of the game when it's finally released, because I got that tier. But yeah, I'm going to play Chapter 2 when it comes out, but I want to see what people are thinking about the game, and, like, what their thoughts are on potentially and where the game can go. So yeah, I guess with all that out of the way, original video will be linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, and as I said before, my playthrough of Chapter 1 of Indigo Park. And yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we? Salem! That was her name! That was the name of the skunk, I just remembered.
Indigo Park is the most recent hit in the mascot horror genre, and for good reason. Not only does it have fun characters and a solid soundtrack, but even with only one chapter out, the story it's setting up seems very interesting. And while we're given a lot of information to start to put this puzzle together, there are definitely still questions raised by the clues we're given. Why does the critter cuff we're equipped with stop some mascots from attacking but not others? Why are said mascots only hostile some of the time? What's the significance of the one character we aren't introduced to with the others, but is instead introduced in a shady and potentially lore-relevant arcade game? Well, sit back and consider subscribing, because today I plan to answer not just these questions, but also explain what really led Indigo Park to the state we see it in today. For those who haven't heard about Indigo Park or need a refresher on the story of Chapter 1, Indigo Park is a sort of Disney-esque amusement park that fell into disrepair after it was suddenly evacuated and closed on October 22nd, 2015. Our player character, Ed, had gone to Indigo Park as a kid, and having a hobby or job of some sort looking into abandoned locations, he decides to find out what's happened to the place. Upon arriving at the park, he's greeted by Rambly the raccoon, a friendly AI who, upon realizing it's been 8 years since anyone had been to the park, very enthusiastically equips him with a critter cuff so Ed can get around, and shows off some of the rides associated with the park's 5 mascots: Rambly, Molly Macaw, Finley the Sea Serpent, Salem the Skunk, though what we see of Salem's portion of the introduction ride is destroyed, and Lloyd L. Lion, aka Lloyd. However, it quickly becomes clear that this
So I gotta say, I've been watching since I played the game, and I've been watching other people's playthrough. Can I just say, I think I'm the first person who saw Molly Macaw behind them in Lloyd's stage, like, in the first time playing. Like, I've seen... Like, there was one video where it kind of like highlighted all the parts where you can hear her or see her in the thing. But I think I'm the first person, at least in all the people I've saw playing the game, where I actually turned around at the right time and actually saw her right behind you. Spoilers, by the way.
Tour extraordinaire!
Great act, Lloyd.
Of course it was! I'm the...
Good reason, as throughout the experience, Ed is stalked by a creature that seems to be a living replica of the Molly Macaw mascot. And while in the park's theater, he encounters another living replica, this time of Lloyd. While Lloyd initially runs from Ed, he ends up stalking him through the backstage, until when he finally attacks, Ed's critter cuff glows and Lloyd recoils and runs. Molly, on the other hand, keeps her distance until Ed opens the door to the back of the Molly-themed kids area, which activates an intense chase sequence where if Ed is caught, the critter cuff won't repel Molly before she gets the kill.
Yeah, and I have to say, that's quite... Her kill screen is, like, quite... Not grotesque, I'm trying to think of the right word, but, like, the fact that she seemingly rips your throat out. Like, that's nuts.
Fortunately, Ed is able to get away from her by meeting back up with Rambly, who is initially taken aback by Ed beelining it into a staff-only area, but realizing that Ed is being chased, Rambly on the spot hires him as an employee and slams the door down on Molly. I will not be showing that scene in its entirety because there was a lot of blood that I am not comfortable showing. But the important thing is that Molly is dead unless she can somehow regenerate her entire body from just her head.
Well, that being said, you never know. Given, like, we don't know what biology these things are, whether they're, like, just mutated animals, or they're, like, some sort of weird science experiments. Like, I could, depending on which way this game goes, I could very easily see it, where all you have to do is, like, reattach, like, push her body and head back together, and, like, put a current through it, and kind of, like, it'll, like, auto-heal itself or something. Like... Depending, again, like, these could literally just be, like, heavily mutated animals, for all we know. But you never know. I mean, granted, we did see her death on screen, like, literally right in front of us, but you never know. In the realms of mad science, anything is literally possible.
Anyway, Rambly explains that he hadn't realized just how bad things had gotten at the park and asks for Ed's help in fixing up the place. When Ed does not seem visually opposed, Rambly is excited, and the end of the chapter has Ed enter the Oceanic Odyssey ride where we see another mascot, Finley, swimming in a nearby tank, teasing what we have in store for Chapter 2. However, while that does summarize the main events of Chapter 1, and it seems pretty obvious that the murderous mascots had something to do with the park's closure, that's not all the story that's there.
No,
with
obviously,
that give lore clues, an optional arcade game with hidden secrets, and certain things about the mascot's behavior, I think there's a bit more going on than just a bunch of dangerous mascots gone rogue. In fact, I don't necessarily think the mascots want to hurt anyone in the first place. After all, if they really were just mindlessly violent monsters, what was stopping Molly from attacking the player at pretty much any point where she makes an appearance in the game before her chase? Why is the first thing Lloyd does when you approach his stage is to run away? While one could argue they just wanted to make sure Rambly couldn't help, as he can't see Ed when he goes backstage or in Molly's play area, you would think that if that were the case, they would start their attacks right away once Ed was in there. Instead, Lloyd waits until the player begins navigating the maze farther in, and while Molly gets pretty dang close in the play area, she doesn't try to attack Ed until he heads past the door in the back of her area. In fact, it almost seems as though their first instinct is to either
run
observe
away
or flee. They provide an opportunity for Ed to to leave, only attacking when he trespasses too far into their territory. As such, while they have definitely hurt people, as shown by the blood on them, the true reason for their aggression is more likely to be fear. Fear of what, you ask? Well, from what we see and hear in the game, we have pretty good evidence that the mascots weren't exactly treated the best by the staff and the customers. In addition to one of the lore collectibles revealing a conversation between two employees worrying about the mascots taking their jobs, which wouldn't exactly endear the mascots to the employees, the main evidence
which again, that whole thing was just, you know, a reference also.
We have for this comes from some of the voice lines from Molly Macaw. From the desk screen we get if she catches the player, we find out that Molly, with Macaw's being a kind of parrot, has the ability to replicate things she's heard. And while some of her lines are just things she would have overheard while we were wandering around the park, others seem to have come from when the park was still open. And the picture they paint of Molly's treatment isn't exactly pretty. As a bit of a highlight reel, the lines that stand out to me specifically include,
"Don't touch that thing, son. Get up, you stupid freak. Get back in your cage, bird."
In fact, we even have the chance to see a representation of said cage in the optional arcade game Rambly Rush, where you can find a secret area showing Molly trapped in a cage. Since this mystery—
Wait, really? You can? Oh no. Oh, that's horrible.
Treatment likely wasn't unique to Molly, it's understandable why the mascots aren't particularly happy when Ed pushes too far into their territory. I think it's possible that while they do have a general mistrust of humans, they prefer not to engage unless pursued into an area where they feel as though they should be able to retreat to safely. Whether it's because there were some humans they interacted with that weren't necessarily bad, or because there's some part of them that still cares about people, it seems like they attack primarily as a last resort. But speaking of attacking, I think it's very interesting that the critter cuff apparently has the ability to stop Lloyd from attacking. This feature would have had to be programmed in intentionally, likely to protect the guests or employees who would have critter cuffs on them in order to access the park and get around in the first place.
Which, I mean, also from what we've seen, like, Lloyd seems to be the biggest, well, land-based mascot we've seen. So, I mean, it would probably make sense to have him be the one that's susceptible to something that's, you know, everybody's wearing just in case, you know, he did go rogue or something.
Implying that the mascots were showing signs of aggression for some time while the park was still open, and steps were taken to keep them from making a move. So if that's the case, what happened for things to get so bad that the park had to get evacuated? They would have had to find some way to get around the restrictions the critter cuffs placed on them. Well, I think it's possible that this connects back to Indigo Park's 5th mascot character, Salem the Skunk. Since Salem's part of the introductory ride is destroyed, which definitely seems to imply that something about Salem is pretty dang important, our only real introduction to who this character is comes from the Rambly Rush arcade game. At the end of that game, Rambly comes across Molly, who crashed her plane after Salem set up a smokescreen in her way. Then Salem uses a potion on Molly that gets rid of her friendship with Rambly, forcing Rambly to defeat Molly to beat the game. Something I find rather interesting in the context of Molly not being repelled by the critter cuff like Lloyd is. In fact, I think it's not unlikely that Salem's explanation about how, with Molly under the influence of the potion, there was nothing stopping her from tearing Rambly to pieces, is connected to why the critter cuff doesn't stop Molly from tearing Ed to pieces like it does with Lloyd. Well, I could definitely be reading too far into this. The inclusion of this game, and it being our only real introduction to a major character at all, seems too intentional for me to ignore. I think it's completely possible that the secret of Molly in the cage isn't the only lore-relevant information we have here. After all, while we don't see a living replica of Salem in Chapter 1, with how we see all the others except for Rambly, I would be pretty surprised if a living version of Salem wasn't around somewhere. Additionally, it does seem as though the mascots have some degree of intelligence, making judgment calls about when to attack or not. This does make sense given these guys were interacting with guests, and even if they weren't exactly treating the mascots well, I doubt the Indigo Park staff would have set completely mindless creatures that couldn't act like the characters at all out there to interact with the guests.
I mean, that being said, I mean, the way that we've seen some of these companies operate in these mascot horror games, you never know.
That would kind of defeat the point of having them, instead of just humans in costumes after all. With this in mind, based on Rambly Rush, Salem as a character seems to be tricky and inventive, creating potions and setting traps. And if the living version of the character was at all accurate to this in personality, I think it's possible that, just as Salem in the game found a way to get rid of the friendship that was stopping Molly from tearing Rambly to pieces, the living Salem may have found a way to do the same with the critter cuff's ability to stop the mascots from tearing anyone else to pieces. At least temporarily, based based on how Lloyd does get stopped by Ed's critter cuff, even though there is blood visible on his paws to show that he has almost definitely killed before. So while we don't have many details about the specifics of what happened, here's how I think the events leading up to Indigo Park's closure may have gone. Whether it be to have a unique experience for the guests, to avoid having to pay human employees, or for some other purpose, the park's mascots were brought to life through whatever sciencey means they came about. However,
well, then again, it could also have been, you know, a kind of like, you know, Bendy Ink Machine inspired, where they wanted, you know, to bring their creations to life and have like real life versions of them.
The employees weren't too happy about this threat to their jobs and were probably somewhat unnerved by these uncanny valley creatures that shouldn't exist, and took it out on the mascots. When the mascots tried to defend themselves, a feature was added to the critter cuff bands to shock them when they attempted to attack someone wearing one, and as such, the mistreatment continued.
I don't think it's not shock, it's like a high-pitched, you know, a sound that only they can hear.
Salem the skunk. Salem was an antagonistic character, and the humans of the park put themselves on the opposing end of that antagonism through their actions. As a character, Salem was intended to be a bit of a wild card, a bit of a trickster, and as such that manifested through Salem figuring out how to work around the boundaries the critter cuffs forced on them, and unleashed the mascots' fury in the park. Indigo Park was evacuated and it shut down, giving the mascots peace in the sense that no one would come to hurt them anymore, at least until Ed shows up at the beginning of chapter 1. Of course, I could be completely wrong about all of this, and something in the next chapters could come up that proves me wrong entirely. But hey, it'll be interesting to see where Indigo Park's story goes. I, for one, am looking forward to finding out how Rambley expects his friends to all be united again, like he mentions in the end credits theme, when his best friend is currently missing her head. But with all that said, consider liking the video.
Yeah, so... Oh god. You know, the whole thing about, you know, Molly losing her head, I mean, I kind of thought of a couple more, like, options beside the whole, you know, mutant animal, all you have to do is squish the two pieces together and they start working again sort of deal. I mean, there's the possibility that, well, I mean, these things had to have been created somehow, so we don't know if the facilities for their creation was part of the park. But if they were, maybe there'd be the opportunity to make a new Molly, one that's friendly. Or maybe we set up, like, somehow get another AI, like a Molly AI or something. That could also happen, who knows? But yeah, I mean, as I said, that kind of plays into the whole thing I was theorizing, that Salem, like the real life Salem, somehow either broke them out or did something so that it got rid of their inability to attack like real people. So I mean, anything's possible. Again, this is literally the beginning of the game, and yeah, definitely gonna have to see. I'm definitely excited to see where this goes, because I know that Unique Geese, I think he was the only programmer on the game. He had people making like assets and stuff, but he was the only programmer, and it took them a year to make that chapter. I hope now that, you know, the game is, at last when I joined, it was like 300% funded. At least I think it was. Let me double check, see what it's at right now. So as of right now, it just went up again. The chapter 2 is funded over $200,000 of its $500,000 goal in US dollars. I remember watching a thing where Geese was talking about, like, the scale of chapter 2 would very much depend on their funding. So something tells me that chapter 2, if it doesn't get stuck in like production hell or something, is going to be massive compared to chapter 1, which, if you think about it, chapter 1 wasn't that big. Like, you had me playing it, and like, I'm known for having playthroughs that go on for maybe a little too long, but I was able to complete that thing in, like, my raw footage was just over an hour, and I was able to shave it down to under an hour. I think 40 minutes, if I remember correctly, around there. But yeah, so the chapter 1 was not that long, but it was a great starting point, and I am so excited to see where they go from like where they launch from it. So, oh yeah. So yeah, of course, that'll be it for now. So of course, as always, original video is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day, as well as, you know, as I said, my playthrough of chapter 1 of Indigo Park. And yeah, with all that out of the way, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.